Welcome, and thank you for joining me for this episode of Life is Mysterious. Today I have a very quirky, small mystery to talk to you about, or at least I originally thought it was a small mystery. You'll understand here in a second. The name of this story is called The Signs Are Out There. So a few years ago, we bought another house out in the county, in the countryside. We bought a beautiful log home, and we had to move from our city house, where I had decorated the house to have a 1950s style soda shop kitchen, black and white checker floors, antique appliances, the whole thing, red and white all the way. But to a farmhouse, that kind of, interior didn't work. So I was left with the task of taking care of getting rid of all the things that wouldn't fit into my log home. So I was looking for more of a general store feel and not a 50s sock hop feel. So I did good, and I was able to narrow down and got rid of like 90% of the memorabilia in the kitchen. And I took with me a few things, some Fiesta ware. I took with me some Bob's Big Boy things, because Bob's my favorite name. It happens to be my dad's name. But anyway, I digressed. I also took with me a sign that was an original sign from an ice cream store here in town. It was just a plain blue sign that said ice cream. It's a metal sign. Nothing distinct about it, but it was an original sign. Anyway, months into the house, I realized, I did well. I picked well. I picked the right things to put in the log cabin house. And I was sitting there enjoying the fruits of my labor, and I was going through a big trunk I have in front of the fireplace on my couch. And I'm looking through the trunk, and in the trunk, it's a memory trunk of all these pictures. And I'm just reminiscing and going through the pictures when I come across a picture of a young man who lived in our old neighborhood. And I'm like, honey, why do we have Nathan's picture? And it looked like it was prom pictures. I said, why do we have Nathan's prom pictures in our trunk? And I'm looking, and we are both scratching our heads. We don't understand why we have this neighbor boy's pictures in our memory trunk. Anyway, I'm sitting there looking through the pictures, and one after the other, lo and behold, I do have his prom pictures. And all of a sudden, it dawned on me, there's a picture of the young man and his date standing in front of a fireplace. And I kind of said, half chuckling, honey, this looks like our fireplace. And my husband looked at it and said, it really does look like our fireplace. Well, guess what? It was our fireplace. Our fireplace in the new house with the old neighbor, in pictures that I shouldn't have in my trunk. But here's where the story gets even more twisted. As we're going through the pictures, and we had a stack of his pictures in our memory trunk, I'm looking, and now I realize he is definitely in our new house. Years ago, in our new house. Way before we ever bought it, thought of it, conceived of it. The neighbor boy was in this house, dating the girl that apparently lived in this house at the time. So I'm looking now for decorating tips. And I'm really not looking at the boy and his date any longer. I'm now looking at the surroundings. When out of the corner of my eye, in the corner of behind his shoulder, is the ice cream sign. The same ice cream sign that was an original ice cream sign from an ice cream parlor here in the town we live in, that traveled from my old house now to this house, possibly back to the original house. Did the ice cream sign find its way back to the house that it should be in? This blew my mind, and it started having me really think, are we all connected? Is everything happening, circling around us? I knew Nathan from the old neighborhood. His pictures are here. The sign is here. Anyway, it blew my mind, and I thought, wow, we're all connected. And that was what I wrote about the first time I wrote the story. But then that story gets deeper. And this is where it turns into not such a small, quirky, fun little story. It turns into a way bigger story. What happened after that is Guidepost Magazine. Now, for those that don't know, a Guidepost Magazine is a Christian publication. And they talk about these mysteries, and they talk about God things. Well, Guidepost Magazine had read that story online. They found it online somehow. Guidepost is out of New York City. I'm nowhere near New York City. And they found it and read it. And they sent an editor to call me and talk to me because they realized I was telling these Life is Mysterious stories week after week in the newspaper. So they wanted to know why I didn't ever submit to their publication. So that was the original intent in their phone call. And when they called me, they asked me that very thing. They found my number, they called the paper that I worked for, and they found my number and called it, and they gave them my number. So Dan Hoffman was the name of the editor, and he said he's calling to find out why I don't submit some of my stories to him. And he said, to be honest with you, I'm a little skeptical of your stories. He goes, how do I know they're really true? And I said, well, they are true, and I know you're just going to have to take it on faith. I said, but I can probably prove to you right now, today, on this phone call, that my stories are true. And he said, okay, do it. I said, you're the editor of a very big, very large New York magazine. How many authors have you contacted and asked them to submit the stories to Guidepost Magazine? And he said, I've never called an author. We get so many submissions, so many query letters, so many that I never have had to call an author. Well, to that, he chuckled and said, this is a Life is Mysterious right here. So that turned the events to now they didn't just want me to write stories, they wanted to follow me, and follow me they did. For 8 months, Guidepost Magazine editor Dan and myself became very close friends, and he called me consistently, constantly, and I called him, and we shared stories, and we talked for 8 months. Finally, the time came for me to go up to New York and meet them. See, Dan was slightly a skeptic, even though he worked for this Christian publication. He didn't always believe that these mysteries really happened. But we met, delightful, probably, I won't talk to him for 10 years, but I can guarantee you, if we pick up the phone, we're going to still be friends. But anyway, and then Dan wound up writing a beautiful story about his experience getting to know me and all the mysteries that happened in the course of the 8 months that we got to know each other. So that was quite an experience. And I'll never forget, right before the publication came out, Dan and I were talking on the phone, and he was questioning, why do these things happen? And I said, Dan, it's just like the story you found online. The signs are out there. The original story that attracted you to me about my little quirky ice cream sign. I said, I'm never going to know why that sign traveled from their house to my house, back to that house. I'm never going to have the answer to that. And then Dan, the skeptic, said to me, what if that sign made that journey just so you would write that story, just so you and I would meet, just so I would write about it in Guidepost Magazine? And even telling it today, I get goosebumps, because the implications of that would mean that that sign took a journey that was 20 years in the making, just so Dan Hoffman and myself could meet and share this story with you today. Folks, today and always, life is mysterious.